Hey guys, today I'll show you a horror thriller TV series named Inside Number 9, Season 6. Spoilers ahead, watch out and take care. The first story begins with a somewhat dim-witted fellow named Arlo, who mistakes his partner's conversation for his own echo. Clearly, he's not the sharpest tool in the shed. Then there's the woman, Columbina, who is a maid. Arlo has brought the ingredients for the sandwich she asked for. He's starving and urges her to make it right away. Columbina, however, tells him to wait until everyone else arrives. At this moment, the mastermind behind the operation and his daughter arrive outside the warehouse. Just as quickly as they appear, the mastermind's cool demeanor is shattered. He opens the trunk of his car to find the tools for the heist exposed and hurriedly covers them up. Meanwhile, Arlo, still hungry, is about to stuff a biscuit into his mouth when Columbina tells him to go outside and help the boss with the equipment. Columbina then breaks the fourth wall, addressing the audience directly. She explains that this episode is a mix of Italian improvisational comedy and a heist movie, probably because both involve masks. She adds that it's already the 6th season of Inside Number 9, so everyone has to understand the writers are running out of ideas. She reassures the audience to bear with the subplot since it'll be over soon. The mastermind's daughter rushes in to find Columbina, seeking help. She reveals that her father plans to marry her off to his friend, Scaramouche, who is also part of this heist. If the heist succeeds, Scaramouche will become incredibly wealthy, making it impossible for her to escape her father's greedy grasp. Columbina, feeling powerless, says she's just the team's humble maid and can't help. The daughter then hands Columbina a love letter she's written to her true love, asking her to pass it to Mario, the doctor's son. Before she can finish her plea, her father walks in. She urgently tells Columbina not to let him know about the letter. Columbina once again breaks the fourth wall, asking the audience to just pretend email and instant messaging don't exist, but she will make sure Mario gets the letter. The mastermind then tells Columbina to stop pretending to live a London life and make him a cup of tea. She agrees, explaining that she's not pretending to live in London, she's imitating Miranda. The boss asks Arlo if he brought the gun he was supposed to. Arlo, in his usual clumsy manner, forgets to put the safety on, nearly causing an accident. This is when Scaramouche makes his entrance. He approaches his fiancée with a heavy Italian accent, leading to a conversation where neither quite understands the other. It finally dawns on the daughter that this is the man her father intends for her to marry. Disgusted, she flees to the bathroom to vomit. Scaramouche, outside the bathroom door, mistakenly believes she's overwhelmed with love for him. The mastermind calls him over to deal with some explosives, but Scaramouche mishears ammonium nitrate as jelly and says he's already eaten it. The boss has to remind him that they're talking about explosives, not dessert. Meanwhile, Columbina hands the love letter to Arlo, instructing him to give it to Mario when he arrives. She assures him that Mario will know who it's from as soon as he reads it. Sure enough, the doctor and his son soon arrive. Before joining the others, the doctor reminds Mario of their own plan to double-cross the team. They've brought fake diamonds, intending to swap them during the heist and keep the real loot for themselves. As everyone gathers, the doctor swipes the sandwich that Arlo was about to eat, leaving Arlo no choice but to hand the letter to Mario. In a twist of fate, Mario, who likes men, looks longingly at the handsome Scaramouche instead. The mastermind then gathers everyone to assign tasks for the heist. Scaramouche, of course, manages to embarrass himself in the process, pushing the boss to the edge of losing his temper. Finally, the boss begins to explain the plan, but to accommodate the BBC's audience, he decides to explain it all over again. This leads to a discussion among the group about not just BBC, but also the viewers in Spain, Australia, and China, completely derailing the conversation. Frustrated, the boss seizes back control, sketching out the heist plan on a map, though his drawing is less than elegant. Here's the plan. At 3:02 p.m., a security guard will drive his truck to a cafe. As he goes inside to place his usual order, the boss's daughter will bump into him to distract him. Meanwhile, Columbina will switch his coffee with one laced with a sedative. Simultaneously, Mario and Scaramouche will block the road, pretending to repair the electrical lines, ensuring no other vehicles can approach. Arlo will distract the guard, giving Scaramouche time to plant explosives on the truck's roof. Once everyone is in position, as soon as the guard takes his first sip of coffee, they'll trigger the explosion. The boss will then grab the keys from the unconscious guard and take the diamond-filled case from the truck. Everyone will return to the warehouse at 6 p.m. to divide the spoils. The plan seems perfect. The boss asks if everyone understands the details. The team is brimming with confidence. The heist begins. Then, in a final twist, Columbina turns to the audience once more, revealing the first big plot twist. She's actually an undercover agent. Cut to Mario and Scaramouche, who are supporting the injured Arlo as they return to the hideout. The operation didn't go as planned because police ambushed them, nearly foiling the entire heist. Despite his usual lack of wit, Arlo realizes that there must be a mole among them. Someone had to have leaked their whereabouts for so many cops to show up. Mario begins tending to Arlo's wounds, but Arlo insists on having a sandwich first. Seizing the chance to be alone, Mario leaves Arlo and rushes to Scaramouche, whom he mistakenly believes is his secret admirer. A hilariously mismatched conversation ensues. One talks about the heist, the other about a date, yet they somehow understand each other perfectly. In the end, Mario plants a kiss on Scaramouche before returning to Arlo with the sandwich. Just then, Arlo's father returns, and Mario quickly snatches the sandwich away again, leaving Arlo to miss out once more. The doctor and Columbina arrive, having managed to escape with the diamonds. However, the sight of Arlo's diabetic blood causes the doctor to faint on the spot. It seems fainting at the sight of diabetic blood is an odd quirk for a doctor. Mario drags his father to the side while Columbina checks on Arlo's injury, subtly probing him about what happened. Arlo admits he accidentally shot himself in his stinky foot, once again forgetting to engage the gun's safety. Meanwhile, the doctor regains consciousness and secretly informs his son that the real diamonds are inside the briefcase. He instructs Mario to quickly steal the keys to the briefcase from Columbina's waist pouch. As the doctor chats with Scaramouche, he spots the tomato sauce on the sandwich, which causes him to faint again. Columbina, on the other hand, finishes tending to Arlo's wound. Arlo quietly tells her that he overheard the boss talking about a mole in their midst. In the meantime, Mario, attempting to steal the keys, clumsily creeps up behind Columbina. When she turns around, Mario flirts with her, and to his surprise, he easily manages to swipe the keys. Returning to his father, Mario sees Scaramouche doing something strange to his father, only to realize his father has fainted yet again. Taking advantage of the situation, Mario swaps the real diamonds with fakes, hiding the genuine ones in a discarded plastic bag on the floor. At that moment, the boss returns, carrying the lifeless body of his daughter. He curses Scaramouche for abandoning them while they were surrounded by police, calling him a coward. Grief-stricken, he orders Columbina to help identify the mole among them. But before she can speak, the boss suddenly stabs her, revealing that his daughter had exposed Columbina as the undercover cop before she died. Time is running out. The police will soon find them. Furious, the boss vows to track down Scaramouche, blaming his cowardice for his daughter's death. Scaramouche, overcome with guilt, emerges, declaring that his love has turned into sorrow, and he now only wishes to join his fiancée in heaven to meet Jesus. Mario, not one to let that slide, steps forward and produces the letter. The boss instantly recognizes his daughter's handwriting, realizing she had planned to elope with her lover behind his back. Enraged by the revelation that his fiancée had a lover, Scaramouche confronts Mario, calling them both traitors, and slaps him across the face. At that moment, the doctor stands up and confesses that the love letter was actually addressed to him, not Mario. It turns out the real lover wasn't the son, but the doctor himself. Earlier, when the boss's daughter had given Columbina the letter, she hadn't finished her sentence, leading Columbina to mistakenly assume it was meant for Mario. In reality, she was referring to the doctor. Realizing his beloved is dead, the doctor admits to his plan. The boss demands the diamonds, but the doctor, unaware that Mario has already swapped them, refuses to hand over the briefcase. Despite Mario's frantic signals, the doctor remains oblivious. Tensions escalate as the boss points a gun at the doctor. Mario, seeing this, pulls out his own gun and aims it at the boss. Scaramouche, in turn, aims his weapon at Mario, while the doctor points his gun at Scaramouche. None of them are willing to back down. Mario urges his father to give up the briefcase, but the doctor misunderstands his son's plea and fires the first shot. A chaotic chain reaction follows. The doctor shoots Scaramouche. Scaramouche hits Mario. Mario misfires, and in a split second, the boss fires the final shot, killing the doctor. The boss emerges as the last one standing, except for Arlo, who is still sitting in a chair, resting. Perhaps out of pity for Arlo's simplicity, the boss decides to spare his shitty life. Arlo, still hungry, asks the boss to make him a sandwich before he leaves. Instead, the boss throws him the bag with the discarded food. As the boss exits, Arlo rushes over to check on Columbina, but it's too late. She's truly gone to meet Satan. With everything settled, Arlo finally gets to eat. He picks up a mint and bites down, only to find that it's the diamond Mario had swapped earlier. It turns out Arlo is the real winner after all. Before leaving, Arlo calls out if Echo is here. Then a clown, identical to Arlo, somersaults onto the screen. It turns out that at the beginning of the story, Arlo wasn't just being dumb when he mistook Columbina's words for an echo. He really does have a brother named Echo. And so the story concludes. The main plot revolves around a gang planning a jewel heist with an undercover cop in their midst. Despite their success in stealing the diamonds, the boss's daughter dies in the process. The doctor and his son have their own agenda, attempting to swap the diamonds, but the doctor's fainting spell leaves him unaware that his son has already made the switch. This leads to a chaotic shootout, with the boss ultimately taking the fake diamonds, while Arlo and his twin brother walk away with the real ones. In addition, the subplot of the show, which revolves around a love story, features the budding romance between the doctor and the boss's daughter, who plan to elope together. The boss's daughter is also Scaramouche's fiancé, while the doctor's son, Mario, mistakenly believes that Scaramouche is the one who sent him a love letter. The second story begins with a man named Spencer rushing home, his hands stained with blood. Frantically, he washes up, but notices that the cuffs of his shirt are also smeared with fresh blood. Next, he sees blood on the floor and hurriedly begins cleaning it up. Suddenly, the doorbell rings. A stranger at the door immediately calls him by name, saying he wants to talk about what happened and he saw it all. It wasn't Spencer's fault. If he wants him to go to the police, he's willing to give a statement. When the man inside doesn't respond, the stranger continues, saying he's going to report the incident. As he turns to leave, Spencer quickly speaks up, asking who he is. The man introduces himself as Simon, claiming to be a witness. He mentions that he recorded the whole incident on video. Hearing this, Spencer invites Simon inside to discuss the situation further. Simon shows Spencer the video. It turns out that Spencer is a well-known screenwriter. Earlier that evening, there had been an awards ceremony, but unfortunately, Spencer didn't win. Afterward, he went to a club to drown his sorrows. As he left the club, a crazed fan confronted him and a scuffle ensued. Spencer accidentally knocked the fan out and then rushed home in a panic. Simon had captured the entire scene on video. Simon, pretending to be Spencer's newly hired personal assistant, managed to avoid arousing any suspicion. The entire conversation was skillfully steered by Simon. Surprisingly, the agent had no objection to restarting the series. In fact, she had already floated the idea to the production company, who were very supportive. Spencer, now trapped and realizing he had little choice, could only watch helplessly as things spiraled out of his control. The agent expressed her delight that Spencer had changed his mind, noting that she hadn't wanted to say it before, but practically everyone disliked the original script. Spencer was shocked to hear this. Meanwhile, Simon continued to push things forward, asking when the agent planned to announce the reboot. Spencer wanted to object, but with Simon holding all the cards, he could only comply. Eventually, Simon demanded to be credited as a co-writer of the new Ninth Circle series, and Spencer had no choice but to agree. Soon, Simon was preparing to announce the reboot on his podcast, with the celebrated Ninth Circle writer Spencer as the guest. Simon had carefully selected numerous comments criticizing the show's original ending and asked Spencer for his thoughts on them. Simon's plan was to get Spencer to admit that the ending was unsatisfactory and to have him personally announce the reboot. However, Spencer seemed unwilling to fully surrender. He defended the original ending, saying it had been carefully planned for a long time and was meant to be both fitting for the series and surprising. He even mentioned that the Sydney Morning Herald had given them a 5-star review. Simon pressed on, asking if Spencer only paid attention to positive reviews and ignored the negative ones. Successfully steering the conversation toward the idea of fan collaboration, Simon forced Spencer to grudgingly acknowledge that the future direction of the series would be influenced by the audience's opinions. Then Simon boldly recommended himself for a role in the new series during the podcast. Naturally, Spencer disagreed, but Simon had a way to deal with him. He organized a poll among his podcast followers. With a devoted fan base, Simon urged them to vote, claiming this is their show now. Under Simon's supervision, Spencer began working on the new series, following Simon's ideas closely. Occasionally, Simon would even take over the writing himself. Unsurprisingly, 87% of the audience voted in favor of Simon playing a role in the series, leaving Spencer feeling like a puppet, powerless to stop what was happening. One day, after Spencer had sent the completed script to his agent, the doorbell rang. A man claimed they had met on the night of the awards ceremony. Spencer immediately recognized him. It was the fan he had accidentally killed. The visitor introduced himself as Gavin. He explained that everything had been Simon's idea. Gavin had originally just wanted Spencer to read his script, but Simon, knowing that Spencer might just throw it away, came up with this elaborate scheme. To his surprise, Spencer had actually fallen for it. Upon learning the truth, Spencer immediately called his agent to cancel the reboot. But before the call could go through, Simon returned. Furious, Simon berated Gavin for showing up too soon and ruining his plan, especially since the contract hadn't been signed yet, meaning everything was still up in the air. Gavin, unwilling to let Simon monopolize his idol, argued with him fiercely. Meanwhile, Spencer, unable to reach his agent, decided he'd had enough. He ordered them both to leave, threatening to call the police if they didn't. Simon then asked him about the reshoot. Spencer retorted, saying that he would never rewrite his work with that garbage script. As he spoke, he casually tossed the notebook aside. Seeing his idol dismiss his hard work so easily, Gavin was heartbroken. He argued that without the support of their massive fan base, the Ninth Circle wouldn't have made it through so many seasons. But Spencer sneered, asking when his work's success had become the fans' achievement. Gavin was deeply hurt by his replies. With that, Simon grabbed a trophy from the shelf and stabbed Gavin, shouting that he had no right to question Spencer's integrity. The obsessive Simon killed Gavin, leaving Spencer paralyzed with shock. Slowly, Spencer walked to the glass wall, staring at Gavin's bloodied, lifeless body. Simon then coldly remarked that he now had leverage over him, accusing him of killing an innocent fan for the script draft that he stole from the fan. Spencer insisted on calling the police, but Simon threatened him, reminding him that the video of their previous argument still existed, along with Gavin's notebook, which served as evidence of plagiarism. Spencer was terrified. Simon reassured him that he didn't want to send him to prison unless it was absolutely necessary. Taking Spencer's hand, Simon led him to the bedroom where they lay down on the bed. Simon whispered that they would be stronger together and they could rule this kingdom forever. Unable to take it any longer, Spencer suddenly flipped over and smothered Simon with a pillow. After a long struggle, Simon finally stopped moving. Spencer left the room, only to find Gavin's body missing. From the bathroom came the sound of running water and Gavin's calm voice apologizing for dirtying the walls. He even asked if Simon had secured the role and how his performance had been. It turned out this was all part of Simon's twisted audition for the role he wanted, a scene where he murders his partner to seduce Spencer, mimicking the storyline he had written. Gavin, oblivious to what had happened in the bedroom, continued to chatter on about the story he had written. This time, Spencer picked up the trophy beside him and struck Gavin with it without hesitation. The scene then shifts to the new ending of the Ninth Circle being met with widespread acclaim. Spencer's agent called to inform him that the network had renewed the show for 2 more seasons. Concerned that Spencer might run out of creative ideas, the agent jokingly asked if he was worried about burning out. Spencer, seemingly in jest, replied that he could always borrow ideas from young creators and then toss them into the Thames. The agent laughed it off, thinking he was just kidding. The agent then requested a brief statement from Spencer for a press release. Spencer responded that he did it all for the fans. The third story begins with a man using binoculars to watch the door of room number 9 from a hotel window. No one has appeared yet. He moves to the bed and opens the drawer, where a Bible and a hairdryer lie forlornly. The desolate atmosphere overwhelms him, and he bursts into tears. After venting his emotions, the man discovers a yellow magazine wedged between the bed frame and the mattress, along with a crumpled tissue under the pillow, an unsavory discovery that speaks for itself. He disdainfully throws the tissue away. The bathroom light doesn't seem to work. Just then, there's a knock on the door. It's the hotel manager. After some brief pleasantries, the manager gets to the point. It turns out the neighboring room had complained to the front desk about hearing sounds of distress coming from the man's room. The man awkwardly lies, claiming he was just watching TV, and the noises must have come from that. The man clearly doesn't want to be disturbed, but the manager is thorough, insisting on checking the in-room cookies to ensure they're still within their expiration date. The cookies are fine, but the manager notices the pornographic magazine on the bed. Before leaving, he discreetly reminds the man that the hotel prohibits soliciting special services. After the manager leaves, the man, out of curiosity, tries the door handle that connects to the adjacent room. It's locked. Perhaps the walls are too thin. He tosses the magazine into the closet with disgust and hangs up his clothes. At that moment, there's another knock on the door. This time, it's a somewhat shy woman. From their conversation, it's clear that this is their first meeting. The woman sits on the bed and starts listing her rates. The man hurriedly explains that there must be a misunderstanding. The woman laughs, saying she was just teasing to ease the awkwardness. It turns out she's not a call girl, much to the man's relief. He moves to boil some water for tea, but the woman quips, saying if he knew half of hotel kettles have been used to boil smelly underwear and the other half had been used to catch urine. The woman then begins her work. She is actually a lip-reading expert hired by the man. The man, now more comfortable, introduces himself as Felix, an ordinary data entry manager. He's been married for 6 years and has a 3-year-old son. About a year and a half ago, his wife returned to the workforce and quickly climbed the corporate ladder. The woman, perceptive and quick, guesses the man's true purpose. He suspects his wife of having an affair. Felix awkwardly admits it. He confesses his wife often travels for work and has become increasingly secretive, fueling his suspicions that she might be seeing someone else. The woman suggests that his wife could just be focusing on her job. Felix is eager to believe this. He hopes he's just being paranoid, but he can't shake his doubts. He discovered in his wife's online calendar that she had an appointment today with a man at room number 9 across the way, which is why he hired the lip-reading service to confirm his suspicions. After listening to Felix's concerns, the lip reader clearly explained that lip reading isn't 100% accurate. Many factors can affect the interpretation, making it a comprehensive process that requires careful consideration. She would need to document all the behaviors of the people across the way in her report, and if anything overly intimate occurred, she hoped Felix would understand that she had to include it. Felix agreed, telling her not to hold back just to spare his feelings. The woman asked Felix to help her take notes for the report, as she needed to stay focused on observing the other room. With that settled, they prepared to start. The woman explained that typically they analyze lip movements through recorded videos or CCTV footage, which allows them to zoom in on the subject. Real-time interpretation, however, could be a bit more challenging. As they were talking, their target appeared, 2 men in dark suits, followed by a woman in a teal top. Felix confirmed that the woman was his wife. Soon after, the 2 men in suits left, and another man entered the room. The woman described him as about 6 feet, with olive skin and thick hair. She added that he's quite handsome, with a hint of amusement. Felix felt a pang of hormone jealousy. The man was his wife's boss, a lawyer, human rights activist, and a political influencer. Felix's jealousy flared. The woman teased that Felix's wife has good taste. Felix awkwardly asked if she's referring to him or her boss, but she said both of them. Her response was somewhat comforting. The observation continued. Felix's wife moved toward the window, and the lip reader relayed that she's asking if she should close the curtains, seemingly wanting to do something in the dark. At that, Felix snatched the binoculars, but before he could see anything, there was a knock at the door. The woman quickly hid her sexy body in the bathroom. It was the hotel manager again, this time bringing a room service menu. He walked in and placed it on the table. Felix, in a panic, hastily shoved the woman's bag under the bed. Noticing Felix's odd behavior, the hotel manager made a flimsy excuse to inspect the room. When he got to the bathroom, Felix lied, saying the door had locked itself. The hotel manager, pulling out a master key, sent a cold sweat down Felix's back. But when the hotel manager opened the bathroom door, the woman cleverly hid behind the shower curtain, drawing the hotel manager's attention away. As the hotel manager adjusted the curtain, she seized the moment and slipped out. Satisfied that everything was in order, the hotel manager reminded Felix of the fire drill scheduled for 3:15 p.m., during which all guests would need to evacuate to the rear parking lot. Finally, he left. After the hotel manager left, Felix opened the closet to find the woman casually flipping through the magazine. Felix quickly explained that the magazine wasn't his. She reassured him, telling him not to worry because her smelly mouth is tight. But then she asked why the hotel manager seemed suspicious of Felix. He seemed perfectly normal. Felix didn't know. Maybe he was just nervous. Or perhaps the surveillance gave him some sort of thrill. The mention of surveillance reminded the woman of her task, and she resumed observing the other room through the binoculars. Fortunately, the curtains were still open, and Felix's wife was just eating. Felix sighed with relief, feeling as though he were undergoing open-heart surgery without anesthesia. He collapsed onto the bed, prompting the woman to mock him for being so neurotic. Felix retorted that she couldn't possibly understand since she had clearly never loved anyone deeply. The scene continued with the woman watching the other room, while Felix watched her through his own binoculars. The situation across the street seemed mundane, so Felix asked the woman about her own life. She revealed that she had never married and had lived alone for a long time. When Felix asked if she was content with her life, she replied that she was. She didn't feel the need for a partner, at least not at the moment. Then a conversation began in the room across the way. It seemed to be about some trivial interview matters. Felix explained that his wife worked as the lawyer's press secretary, so they were likely discussing work. But soon, the mood in the room grew tense, making Felix anxious. The woman reported that his wife picked up her phone and mentioned calling Max. Just then, Felix's phone rang. The woman interpreted as she went, asking if he had called himself last night. Felix denied it, saying he had been out with friends. His wife reminded him not to forget about the weekend plans. He needed to pick up their son from his mother's and not forget the little Lakers pajamas. Felix turned to the woman and corrected her, saying it was actually Minions' pajamas. Felix then suggested to his wife that they meet for lunch another day to discuss things, but his wife coldly replied that she didn't want to see him. They were finished. The lip reader continued to relay his wife's words, revealing that she had already applied for a restraining order. The lawyer mentioned that Felix's behavior could be considered arse-mount, which Felix corrected as harassment, adding that she didn't need to repeat everything since he could hear it himself. His wife asked who Felix was talking to, and he lied, saying it was just the TV. Before hanging up, his wife expressed a hope that Felix would find someone he liked. The woman apologized for the awkwardness, but Felix was already spiraling into madness. The lawyer nodded in agreement with Felix's wife and moved closer to her, putting his hormone-let-go arm around her sexy body and offering to help her out. Felix couldn't take it anymore. He grabbed the binoculars and smashed them against the wall, realizing that the lip reader had misinterpreted earlier. It wasn't Max she was calling, it was my ex. Given the situation, the woman decided it was best to leave. Felix, however, seemed reluctant to let her go and began talking about his life. He admitted that he had never been married and had broken up with his girlfriend 8 months ago. She had assured him it wasn't because of another person, but Felix couldn't believe it. He fell into a deep depression and spent his days on a talking forum where disheartened men shared their woes. One of the members he connected with suggested that he investigate to see if his ex-girlfriend was really involved with the lawyer. If not, Felix might still have a chance. Following the advice, Felix had hired the lip-reading service. The woman tried to comfort Felix, encouraging him to look forward and not to lose confidence in himself. At that moment, they drew closer to each other. Suddenly, there was another knock on the door. It was the hotel manager again. He had received another noise complaint, likely from the sound of the binoculars hitting the wall. This time, Felix was assertive, no longer polite, and quickly dismissed the hotel manager. While the woman was in the bathroom, Felix accidentally noticed a new message notification on her phone from the same forum he used. Felix immediately became suspicious. He rummaged through her bag and found a USB drive with his initials on it. Plugging it in, he discovered it contained footage of him, secretly recorded. The woman stepped out of the bathroom, unaware of anything unusual. She decided to continue helping Felix with the lip-reading task. The lawyer across from them said, "This has been in the works for over 3 years, and people are going to be shocked." At that moment, Felix was filled with doubt. He cautiously asked the woman how her company had assigned her to this task. The woman replied that it was a random assignment from headquarters. Felix wasn't convinced. He pressed further, asking how she knew the manager's name on her first visit to the hotel. She claimed Felix had just mentioned it earlier, but Felix denied this. He directly showed her a video and demanded to know what was really going on. Seeing the video, the woman finally showed a hint of nervousness. She opened the window, saying she needed a drink to calm down her sexy body. Eventually, she confessed that Felix's ex-girlfriend's boss, the lawyer, was running a high-profile campaign. As his security increased due to death threats he had received online, the lawyer's security team began investigating Felix, suspecting his erratic behavior might interfere with the campaign. Fearing Felix could become a problem, they sent the woman to monitor him and ensure he wasn't a threat. She explained that the videos Felix had were transcribed by the security team and passed on to her for lip reading. However, after observing Felix for an extended time, she felt she deeply understood him and was inexplicably drawn to the lonely man she saw in the footage. At that moment, Felix realized the person who suggested hiring a lip reader on the forum was none other than the woman standing in front of him. She admitted it was indeed her. She wanted to meet him in person, hoping it would help him move on from his ex-girlfriend. After revealing everything, the woman looked downcast. Before leaving, she told Felix that she didn't believe his ex and her boss were having an affair, and wished Felix luck in winning her back. For the first time, Felix realized who truly cared for him. They shared a smile as they fell into the gap between the beds for a nasty hormone yoga session. 2 minutes later, they finished and the woman crawled out, accidentally knocking a glass of water off the table. She looked for a hairdryer to clean the carpet, but the lighting was too dim, so she asked Felix to open the curtains. At that moment, gunshots rang out from outside. The lawyer across the street had been shot. Chaos erupted outside as Felix rushed to the window, shouting his ex-girlfriend's name, trying to warn her to stay safe. Suddenly, the woman whispered to give her order. Felix was shot dead on the spot. The woman then opened the connecting door to the adjacent room, where the real shooter handed Felix's body a gun. She wiped the fingerprints off the hairdryer and the used glass. The shooter placed a telescope and previous surveillance records on a chair by the window, leaving behind a bullet casing before the two quietly exited through the neighboring room. Outside, everything was in disarray. The hotel manager rushed to the scene, suspecting something was wrong. He found the supposed killer already dead. News broadcasts covered the shooting of the lawyer, who had been on the verge of releasing an explosive investigative report that would have had a massive impact on the British government. Sadly, the lawyer was killed before the report could be published. The news confirmed that the suspect was Felix, the ex-boyfriend of the lawyer's media secretary. The motive was cited as a crime of passion. Witnesses claimed Felix had brandished a gun while shouting his girlfriend's name before being shot dead by police. The hotel manager, in an interview, confirmed that the suspect appeared agitated and had been drinking. On television, a government spokesperson called the lawyer's death a tragedy, but the investigation concluded that it was simply a domestic dispute gone horribly wrong. As the news interview wrapped up, the government spokesperson's bodyguard looked around cautiously. It turns out she was the same woman who had lip-read for Felix. In this story, Felix was an ordinary man with a long-term ex-girlfriend who had left him. Unable to move on, he constantly harassed her. One day, on advice from a forum user, Felix hired a detective service to investigate his ex. He employed lip-reading services to monitor her. The lawyer never appeared in person but was a key figure. Felix suspected his ex's boss of having an affair with her. The lawyer, a high-profile politician running for office, was about to release a report that could severely damage the current government. However, the woman performing the lip-reading was actually a government security agent. To protect the government's interests, she was assigned the task of eliminating the lawyer. To cover up the political assassination, the woman set up Felix to take the blame, making the murder appear to be a crime of passion. Throughout the story, many small details hint at something far more sinister. For example, in the beginning, Felix was crying into his pillow, yet a noise complaint was lodged soon after. This, along with repeated complaints, was orchestrated by the shooter in the next room to create a negative perception of Felix, ensuring that after the incident, the hotel manager would naturally confirm Felix's erratic behavior to the police. The adult magazine on Felix's bed was clearly planted, as new rooms would have been thoroughly cleaned, especially considering the hotel manager had said the hotel was going through a critical period where even small items like cookies were inspected. It was impossible for a magazine to have been left behind. Moreover, the agent had likely booked rooms in the hotel multiple times under fake names, which explained why the manager warned Felix not to cause trouble when he first saw the magazine. As a professional, the woman knew not to leave any DNA behind. When Felix offered her tea, she declined, claiming the kettle was unclean, a strategic move. She also had Felix write down the lip-read dialogue, a convenient way to later frame him. When the woman emerged from hiding in the wardrobe, she immediately mentioned the hotel manager by name, proving she had scouted the hotel beforehand and knew its staff well. When Felix's ex-girlfriend asked him if he had called her the previous night, this too was part of the agent's manipulation, calling anonymously to harass the ex in order to paint Felix as obsessive and unstable. The agent's posts on the forum and her encouragement of Felix to investigate his ex and hire the lip-reading service were all part of a larger scheme leading up to the murder. When she later opened the window and appeared nervous, it wasn't because her surveillance had been compromised. She was preparing for the murder, making it seem like Felix was the gunman when the real shooter fired the shots. Finally, when Felix stood at the window, frantically calling out to his ex to warn her, the agent handed him the hairdryer, making him appear to be the shooter. This allowed the real assassin to shoot Felix, ensuring he became the scapegoat for the political assassination. In the end, Felix tragically became a pawn in a much larger political conspiracy. The fourth story begins with James, a background actor, had just arrived at the set when a crew member hurriedly escorted him to the actor's lounge. The crew member was preoccupied with their tasks, speaking into a walkie-talkie. James, feeling a bit out of place, asked if he could speak with the costume department, but before he could finish, the crew member rushed off, leaving him alone. With nothing else to do, James decided to rehearse the few lines he had. Just then, a heavyset woman wearing a bathrobe and holding a Barbie doll appeared in the living room. It turned out the lounge was a rented room in someone's home. The woman named Bev was the daughter of the homeowner. James explained that he was an actor waiting for his scene. Bev didn't seem to care. After exchanging a few polite words rather than hormones, James tried to go back to memorizing his lines. However, Bev stared at him intensely, making him uncomfortable. She mentioned that she was drinking champagne to celebrate her birthday. James responded with a few non-committal phrases, but Bev still didn't leave. She started talking about her favorite movie, Disney's Dumbo. James wasn't sure how to respond, so he smiled and nodded before trying once again to focus on his lines. Seeing that James wasn't engaging, Bev asked him which role he was playing. His costume made it obvious he was a police officer in the film. Just then, Bev's mother entered the room, scolding her daughter. After all, it was a rented lounge. James, trying to be polite, mentioned that it was her daughter's birthday, so it was fine to be relaxed. The mother corrected him, saying it wasn't her daughter's birthday. She pointed out that her daughter often lied to get attention. At this, Bev burst into maniacal laughter, proudly showing off her champagne, which was actually just a soft drink. The family seemed strange, and James, feeling uneasy, made an excuse to get a drink of water, hoping to leave. But the mother insisted he stay, enthusiastically going to pour him some water. Any hope of quietly rehearsing his lines vanished as the mother kept talking, while Bev continued to smile and stare at him. James awkwardly sat on the sofa, trying to endure the situation. Desperate for a distraction, James brought up the film he was working on. The story was based on a baby's disappearance over 20 years ago, and he was playing a police officer who reported to his superior. Although his role was small, he was excited to be acting alongside a famous star and wanted to make the most of the opportunity. Hearing about the case, the mother remembered the baby. It had gone missing in the local East Park. She remarked that it was strange to bring up the case again after all these years. At that moment, a crew member returned, informing James that due to some set changes, his scene had been moved to the end of the day, and he'd need to stay on standby as the schedule could change at any time. James considered asking for a different waiting area, but when the crew member asked if the family was bothering him, he awkwardly denied it. Before he could mention anything about his costume, the crew member rushed off again, leaving James once more under the scrutinizing gaze of the mother and daughter. Resigned, James sat back down and tried to glance at his lines, but the strange mother-daughter duo kept staring at him. Bev complained that her parents never let her go out or make friends, while the mother explained that Bev had mental health issues, which was why her movements were restricted. Bev shouted that she was not sick and she was just shy. Listening to their argument, James needed a break and headed to the bathroom. As he was about to go, Bev warned him to sit down to pee. Embarrassed, James awkwardly agreed. Just as James entered the bathroom and hadn't even had a chance to catch his breath, the man of the house returned. James had no choice but to fake flushing the toilet and quickly vacate the space. The man glared at him, clearly displeased. Back in the living room, the tension grew. After a while, the man emerged, eyeing James's police uniform with obvious disdain. He began ranting about how the police had harassed him in the past. Without a care, he picked up James's script and began flipping through it. Meanwhile, the woman at the window commented on the filming outside, noting how the crew kept repeating the same scene. James explained that this was normal during filming and that the waiting could be exhausting. Mentioning exhaustion seemed to anger the man, who snapped that he had to wake up at 5:30 a.m. every day to work on asphalt, braving the cold. The atmosphere grew tense again. To break the silence, Bev asked James about the missing baby in the movie. She wanted to know if the mystery was ever solved. Since it was a cold case, the mother interjected, saying no one knew what had happened. The man blamed the baby's mother for leaving the child alone at a newsstand. James, sensing something off, asked if the couple had lived in the area at the time of the incident. The man said they had, while the woman claimed they hadn't, giving two completely different answers. The woman quickly explained that they only moved to the area 2 months after the incident. The man fell silent, seemingly accepting her version of events. James began to suspect they were hiding something. Bev, acting increasingly erratic, chimed in that she knew what had happened. The baby had been taken by a dog. Her parents, clearly frustrated, dismissed her bullshit as she spiraled into another episode, laughing uncontrollably. The room fell into an uneasy silence, and the father ordered Bev to go change her clothes. At that moment, the famous actor James was scheduled to work with entered the lounge. After brief introductions, the actor politely asked the crew to escort the family out. Once they were alone, the actor suggested running through a quick rehearsal. James read his meager 3 lines, but the famous actor found excuses to claim those lines for himself, leaving James with nothing. Given the power imbalance, James had no choice but to swallow his frustration in silence. After the famous actor left, the landlady came out to apologize for the earlier disruptions. Seizing the moment, James asked if she knew the mother, whose baby had gone missing. The landlady mentioned she had bumped into her a few times while buying meat, but she felt that the baby's mother didn't take good care of him. The baby was always crying. James sensed something off and confronted her if she had said earlier that she only moved here after the incident. Before the woman could respond, a crew member came in to inform James that today was the missing baby's birthday. The famous actor who had stolen his lines earlier suggested everyone hold a moment of silence for the lost child. Hearing this, something clicked in James's mind. He glanced at the birthday card on the table, his suspicions growing. He went to the bathroom, flipping through the script as he compared the details. According to the script, a man in a red tracksuit had been seen carrying the baby away. James then looked at a photo of the man wearing red pants. Finally, he noticed a bottle of hair removal cream on the sink and recalled that Bev had suspiciously been shaving her face earlier. James hurried to find a crew member and shared his discovery, convinced that the family had abducted the baby all those years ago. He believed that their daughter Bev was actually the missing baby, now grown up but unaware of her true identity due to her mental instability. He insisted that the police should be called immediately. However, the crew member, too busy with their own tasks, barely listened to James's smelly bullshit. Seeing no other option, James returned to the house, determined to find solid evidence that Bev was indeed the missing baby. He went into Bev's room, which was filled with dolls. Despite being an adult, she was still playing with toys. James cautiously asked if she had any childhood photos. As Bev began rummaging through her things, James spotted a blanket on her bed with a dinosaur pattern. Unfolding the blanket, he saw the baby's name embroidered on it, confirming his suspicions. Just then, Bev's father appeared at the door, his face dark and menacing. He demanded to know why James was in his daughter's room and ordered him to leave immediately. The mother soon entered as well. Feeling confident, James confronted the couple, accusing them of either losing a child or being unable to have one, and then stealing someone else's baby to fill the void. He suggested that they had faked a move to avoid suspicion and had raised the baby as their daughter, keeping to themselves and treating her like a child, stunting her mental growth. He argued that's why Bev still acted like a child and even sat down to urinate, and that explained why she had been shaving her face earlier. She was actually the missing boy. After James laid out his theory, the mother vehemently denied it, explaining that Bev simply had heavy body hair. As for the lie about moving, she admitted they had made that up, but only because her husband had been secretly working while also collecting welfare benefits, and they didn't want to get caught. Still, James wasn't convinced. The red tracksuit and the shared birthday seemed like too much of a coincidence. The landlady explained that when the baby went missing, her daughter was already 10 years old, so the ages didn't match. Undeterred, James pulled out the dinosaur blanket, which the missing baby had been wrapped in when he disappeared, and demanded her to explain that. At that moment, a crew member entered the room, announcing that they had found the blanket. It was a prop left behind by the crew the previous day. James's scene was ready to shoot, and he was told to follow the crew member to the set. Realizing the blanket was just a film prop, James was briefly thrown off, but he still believed his theory was correct. Desperate to prove his point, he grabbed Bev and yanked open her shirt, attempting to reveal her true identity. However, Bev was indeed a woman. Furious, her father punched James, knocking him out. Much later, the episode James had been filming finally aired. Sadly, all of his lines had been cut, leaving only a brief shot of him nodding in the background. As he turned away, the bruise from the punch was still visible on his eye. The family of 3 watched the episode together, criticizing James, saying he wasn't much of an actor, just a bit player. As for the missing baby case, it was never solved, and no one ever discovered the truth. Bev sat quietly holding a doll, and in a chilling final shot, we could clearly see that the doll's hidden left hand had decayed into a skeletal bone. It turns out James had been just one step away from the truth. In this story, when Bev mentions she is celebrating a birthday, she doesn't say it's her birthday. She also says her favorite movie is Disney's Dumbo, a story where a stork delivers babies to all the animals except Mrs. Jumbo. This hints at a deeper meaning. Someone indeed stole a baby, just as James suspected. However, it wasn't because the couple had lost a child or were infertile. Instead, it was due to their daughter's mental illness and her long-standing isolation, with no healthy communication or companionship. This reveals that Bev longed for someone to be with her, so her parents, like the storks in Dumbo, brought her a baby. Whether the 10-year-old Bev stole the child herself or if her parents were involved remains open to interpretation. Even if a mentally ill 10-year-old had kidnapped the baby, it's unlikely the parents wouldn't have known about it, or at least become aware of the stolen baby over time. The father's hostility toward the police suggests he feared his crime would be uncovered. The parents' efforts to minimize Bev's contact with the outside world also imply their knowledge of the baby's existence. The mother's guilty looks further hint at her awareness. It's likely that soon after the baby was taken, he died, as the skeletal remains of his small hand suggest. The family hid his remains inside one of Bev's beloved dolls, so the baby would stay with her forever, fulfilling her desire for companionship. The fifth story begins with Urban, a private caregiver, who had just returned home after work when he was urgently called back. He was the personal nurse for the once famous British lawyer, Mr. Webster, now in his twilight years. Webster's health had deteriorated severely, and his temper had become volatile, leaving the staff constantly on edge. It was the lawyer's birthday today, and though guests had been invited to celebrate, Webster had angrily dismissed them all, specifically asking for Urban to come back and care for him. The butler, clearly relieved to see Urban, mentioned that the old man had been in a foul mood all afternoon, even requesting to see a priest for confession and rambling incessantly about old cases, seemingly losing his grip on reality. Urban knew this was just Webster's way of seeking attention. After handing over the shift, the butler left, muttering complaints under his breath. Taking a deep breath, Urban prepared himself to deal with his difficult employer. Webster grumbled about everyone who looked after him, finding fault with all of them, though he reluctantly gave Urban the highest score, 30 out of 100. Urban was unfazed by Webster's harshness. He chatted with him while attending to his duties, trying to calm him down, reminding him that it was his birthday and there was no need to be so angry. But Webster wasn't having it. He demanded that Urban give him more painkillers, saying he was in unbearable discomfort. Urban, however, remained firm, refusing to administer more than the prescribed dose, no matter how much Webster begged or threatened. He knew that too much would be dangerous. Joking about Webster's bad temper, Urban managed to keep things light. The old man, though cursing, wasn't truly angry. Knowing he had disrupted Urban's plans to attend a concert, Webster offered to compensate him. Urban brushed it off, explaining that it wasn't about the money. He was just there to support a friend. Webster, feigning a hint of jealousy, mumbled that he too needed Urban's support. Curious, Urban asked why Webster had insisted on his return that evening. The lawyer began reminiscing about his glory days in the courtroom, boasting about his unprecedented 45-year winning streak. He had once been hailed as a lion of the courtroom, but those days were long gone. Now, confined to his bed, he felt helpless and defeated. Sensing Webster's low spirits, Urban suggested a game to lift his mood, a mock trial, where the famous lawyer could once again showcase his legal brilliance. Webster initially dismissed the idea, but Urban tempted him with half a painkiller, and the lawyer finally agreed. The mock case was as follows. Urban played a suspect accused of shooting his ex-wife. It was their daughter's birthday party, and there were 25 witnesses who saw him brandishing a shotgun, tying up his ex-wife, and driving her to an isolated cabin. He demanded custody of their daughter, but when his ex refused, he allegedly shot her. Urban asked Webster how he would defend such a case. After thinking for a moment, Webster delivered a brilliant defense. His client had been cleaning his legally owned shotgun, preparing for a hunting trip. Suddenly, a party balloon popped, making him believe there had been a gunshot. Fearing for his wife's safety, he tied her up to prevent her from harming herself and drove her to a safe house in the countryside. Not only that, Webster added, they would countersue the party company for $5 million for using faulty balloons. Urban applauded, impressed by Webster's quick wit. The lawyer laughed heartily, only to start coughing violently, almost choking. Alarmed, Urban quickly gave him oxygen, and slowly, Webster's breathing returned to normal. For a brief moment, the once great lawyer had forgotten about his pain, and he was grateful to Urban for the distraction. As the evening wore on, Webster asked for Urban's help with a favor. He wanted him to open a cabinet and retrieve some old case files. While searching for the key, Urban casually asked why Webster had chosen to become a defense lawyer. Webster couldn't think of a specific reason and instead turned the question back on Urban, asking why he became a caregiver. Urban shared a story from his school days. One of his classmates, a notorious bully, had choked on an orange. Because the boy had terrorized everyone, no one wanted to help him. Urban, only 13 at the time and lacking any first aid knowledge, panicked and tried hitting the boy on the back, but it didn't work. The boy's face turned blue, and he died right there in front of him. Urban had never been able to shake that memory, and perhaps that was why he chose to become a caregiver, so he could help others in need. The old man listened intently as Urban searched for the key, though they couldn't find it. Instead, Urban found some lock-picking tools and pried open the drawer. Suddenly, the old man had second thoughts and didn't want to face his old case files. Urban joked that they had already opened the door and couldn't stop now. Maybe there is a severed head in there. It was just a joke. There didn't seem to be anything too terrifying inside. But out of nowhere, the old man began to seize. Without hesitation, Urban injected him with a sedative, forcing him to rest. In seconds, the old man slowly drifted off to sleep. While the old man finally settled down, Urban enjoyed a peaceful moment. He listened to some TikTok music, ate some cake, and casually flipped through the old case files. He became engrossed in them as the night crept into the early hours. Suddenly, he heard a noise outside the door. Curious, he opened the door to find an orange placed at the entrance. From the couch, strange noises were coming. As he walked closer to check, he saw the school bully from his past grabbing at him. Urban jolted awake. It turned out to be a dream within a dream. Webster had also woken up by this point and was now looking through the case files. He started talking to Urban about a first-degree murder case he was reading. In that case, the defendant had strangled his lover with a belt. Everyone knew he was guilty, and back then, Webster's legal career seemed doomed. But the successful acquittal in this case made his name famous, and from that point on, he never lost another trial. Urban asked how he managed to pull it off. Webster revealed that he had fabricated key evidence to win the case, and it had haunted him ever since. Desperate, Webster asked Urban if he would forgive him. Urban reassured him that he would. Relieved, the old man pulled out a key he had kept hidden and opened a small box. Inside was a contract. He explained that this contract was signed 60 years ago and tonight marked the final deadline. Urban thought the old man was talking nonsense again, but Webster grabbed him, agitated. He asked Urban if he thought he became successful overnight by chance. Just then, the power went out. Urban stood up, planning to check the fuse box in another room. After some persuasion, he finally went to flip the breaker, but the power didn't come back on. At that moment, the clock struck midnight. Webster shakily rose, locking the door behind Urban, who was now trapped outside, unaware. Urban lit a candle as the 12 chimes rang out. The elevator stopped on the 9th floor, its doors opening slowly. It was too dark to see who was inside. From the sound of it, it was the elevator operator. The operator stepped out, his furry hand removing his glasses to reveal glowing red eyes. Urban instantly realized this was the devil himself. The devil had come to collect on a debt owed, and that debtor was Mr. Webster. With a roar, the bedroom door blew open. The terrified Webster stood behind it, finally understanding that his wildly successful career had come at a price, a pact he made with the devil. And tonight, the devil had come to take him away to meet Satan. Urban, witnessing the scene, pleaded for mercy on Webster's behalf, but the devil wasn't swayed by his nonsense. A deal was a deal. Just as Urban apologized for being unable to help, Webster was offering the devil a trade. He proposed that the devil take Urban instead of him since Urban had a purer soul than him. The devil, intrigued, found Webster's cunning idea tempting. Urban protested fiercely, but Webster coolly remarked that this isn't an American court and his objection is overruled. The devil, amused, agreed to the deal. Webster signed the contract in blood, sealing the pact. Urban would be taken in Webster's place, and the old man would regain his health and continue living a life of luxury. As Urban was being led into the elevator by the devil, he weakly muttered he was really not as good as they thought. The devil replied it knew. In an instant, the positions were swapped. Webster, not Urban, was once again in the devil's grasp, confused by what had just happened. It turned out that Urban's story about the bully choking on an orange had a different version. In reality, Urban was the bully. Out of cruelty, he had stuffed the orange down his classmate's throat just for fun, leading to the boy's death. He had kept this dark secret buried for years, though it continued to haunt his dreams. Urban had tried to atone for his actions ever since, but now the devil saw through his deception. Realizing that Urban's soul wasn't as pure as he claimed, the original contract remained valid. The devil tore up the substitute agreement and took Webster to the depths of hell. The sixth story begins when London's annual Grand Promenade Concert Festival was underway, and a traditional British family had gathered to enjoy the final night of the event. Meanwhile, an unexpected visitor arrived in the garden. The family consisted of 6 members. In the frame was the elderly father, whose mind had deteriorated to the point where he would randomly spew profanities. The woman was the eldest daughter named Penny, who lived in the family home with her patriotic husband to care for her aging father. The man, covered in Union Jack flags, was a staunch nationalist. On the sofa sat the husband and son of the younger daughter, Dawn, while she herself was in the kitchen preparing a lavish dinner. She happened to notice a stranger standing aimlessly in the garden, but for reasons unknown, she decided not to raise the alarm. The TV was broadcasting Henry Wood's Fantasia on British sea songs. The two men on the sofa made small talk, though their conversation seemed somewhat awkward. Meanwhile, Dawn, gazing out at the stranger in the garden, appeared distracted. Penny noticed nothing out of the ordinary, and the two sisters chatted about their husbands. In Dawn's mutterings, there was a hint that something was amiss. Her husband seemed to have lost interest in her. Her sister, however, didn't catch this and assigned her some tasks. By this point, the other family members had already gathered in the living room. The brother-in-law explained the origins of the piece currently playing, noting how concert-goers often feigned tears. He even wiped at his own eyes in mock sorrow. Dawn's husband, though, was more cynical, mocking these displays of emotion. The confused old man continued to spout obscenities, while the out-of-place brother-in-law sat in silent disbelief at the absurdity around him. Taking advantage of a moment to fetch water, Dawn invited the strange man from the garden into the house. She explained that she had met him at the cemetery while visiting her mother's grave and had given him 2 coins. Judging by his name and appearance, he seemed to be of Arab descent, though he didn't appear to understand what the woman was talking about. Meanwhile, Penny and her husband were engrossed in conversation, much to the irritation of the brother-in-law, who found their shallow, nationalistic pride grating. The couple even got the name of the song wrong, which only added to his discomfort. He noticed that his wife had disappeared and got up to find her. Dawn was practically clinging to the stranger, complaining about her husband's dissatisfaction with the state of the country and his coldness toward her. As the music built to a crescendo, so did her emotions as she became increasingly animated. In the living room, the rest of the family danced along to the music, everyone except the disconnected brother-in-law. When the song ended, Dawn returned with the water, acting as if nothing had happened. Penny asked their father if he had enjoyed the TikTok dancing, but he responded with more vulgar language. Ignoring him, she focused on the conversation with her sister. Dawn's husband and son, both struggling to cope with the family gathering, resorted to alcohol to numb their discomfort. The husband refused to let their underage son drink, though. At that moment, the concert began playing Home Sweet Home. Penny beamed with pride as she looked around at the family she had worked hard to keep together. Even the senile old father seemed moved to tears. Dawn finally returned with the water, and the brother-in-law remarked that she had missed the cheerful song earlier. She shrugged it off, feeling guilty inside. The family returned to the living room just as Land of Hope and Glory started playing. Dawn poured drinks for her husband and son, and the husband muttered how else he was supposed to get through this. She asked pointedly if he was talking about the concert or their marriage. Their conversation was tense. Penny was a staunch supporter of Brexit, and her husband tried to ease the tension by bringing up Scotland and Wales. Meanwhile, the stranger entered the dining room where a feast had been laid out. Starving, he devoured most of the food within a single song's duration. When he heard someone approaching, he quickly hid. The brother-in-law arrived, and seeing the mess at the table, he assumed the family dog was to blame. At this point, Rule Britannia began playing, and the old man, excited by the music, started singing along, albeit with profanity. Penny quickly gave him his medication. The young boy asked his mother what she was drinking. She replied, "Just water." Trusting her, the boy didn't question it and started drinking. Unable to tolerate his sister-in-law's poor grammar any longer, the brother-in-law finally snapped and the two began arguing. First, Penny boasted that Brexit had been a success, while the brother-in-law mocked her, saying they had brought this on themselves. She fired back, accusing him of being jealous that they had taken back their country. As the argument heated up, the brother-in-law stood up, dressed in formal attire, and dramatically sang, "Britons never will be slaves." Dawn joined in, complaining that her husband didn't love anything. He retorted that he loved the gym and collecting records. She sneered, implying he was more interested in the men in the gym's locker room. Penny tried to calm her sister, calling her husband a sad fool. At the mention of fool, the brother-in-law perked up. He pulled out a report explaining that they had traced the family's genealogy. With a smug grin, he revealed that Penny was 62% German. Despite her fierce nationalism, she wasn't really British. He continued to gloat, revealing that his wife's DNA test had very different results from her sister's. Moreover, their father had been tested as well, and his results matched Dawn's, meaning that Penny wasn't his biological child. It turned out that their mother had conceived Penny while on a skiing trip in Germany. Their father, who had always hated Germany because of the war, had never gone with her. As the brother-in-law continued his tirade, the drunken son started vomiting nearby. As Dawn opened the door to go to the kitchen for some water, the strange man was suddenly standing right there at the entrance. Everyone was stunned. Dressed as he was, the senile old man immediately mistook him for God. Penny tried to calm everyone down and questioned the man about how he got inside. He pointed to Dawn. She quickly denied any involvement, distancing herself from him. Meanwhile, the brother-in-law, viewing the man with suspicion, saw his Middle Eastern appearance and inability to speak English and immediately suspected he might have a bomb. Penny's husband thought he was being overly dramatic, reasoning that the man was likely just a hungry, illegal immigrant. He left to get some food for the stranger, but when he reached the dining room, all the food that had been devoured earlier had mysteriously reappeared. Confused, he called the women over to ask what had happened, certain that their dog had eaten everything. Back in the living room, the brother-in-law patted the man down, searching for any hidden weapons. The poor stranger had no choice but to endure being groped by both husband and wife. At that moment, Dawn's son saw the bloodstains on the man's hands and fainted. Dawn, clearly a bit unhinged, immediately associated the man with Jesus. She ran back into the living room, dropped to her knees in front of him, and begged for forgiveness. Penny's husband suggested they call the police, and everyone began arguing over how to handle the situation. In the midst of the chaos, the senile old man suddenly snapped, and before anyone could react, he had stabbed the stranger multiple times in the stomach. As if that wasn't enough, the brother-in-law grabbed a knife and began stabbing him as well, in a crazed frenzy. The music reached its climax as the stranger uttered his last words that he was thirsty before succumbing to his injuries. As Jerusalem began playing on the television, the family stopped arguing and wrapped the stranger's body in a Union Jack. The men disposed of the body while the women cleaned up the evidence of the murder. Once everything was in order, the old man and the young boy went off to rest, leaving the 4 remaining family members to sit in silence, staring at one another. They began rationalizing their actions. The brother-in-law argued that none of this was a miracle. The man was probably just a cook. He suggested that the son's drink had likely contained alcohol, as the bottle had previously been used for liquor. He reasoned that the blood on the man's hands was probably just from a cut. The brother-in-law, seemingly trying to convince himself, concluded that their actions were in self-defense. Finally, Penny and her husband reached an agreement with the brother-in-law, and the group began singing Auld Lang Syne. Dawn, avoiding her husband's hand, walked over to the kitchen window, where she saw the man's reflection in the glass, falling into his embrace once again. The story is set against the backdrop of the final night of the Proms, an annual classical music festival held in central London over the summer. This particular story takes place on the last night of the 2018 Proms, the same year the Queen approved the Brexit bill, allowing the UK to leave the EU. This explains the tension between Penny, who supports Brexit, and her brother-in-law, who was against it. The Brexiteers narrowly won, creating the family's ideological divide. As the story progresses, the stranger's appearance in white robes and long hair, combined with his Arab features, makes the brother-in-law suspicious, assuming he might be a terrorist. Earlier, he had ridiculed the family for being xenophobic, yet here he is displaying his own prejudice. Meanwhile, Dawn starts to believe the stranger is Jesus, based on his appearance and the miracle of the reappearing food. She even connects her denial of knowing him to the biblical story of Peter denying Christ 3 times. In this way, the narrative cleverly intertwines religious allegories. The son's water turning into wine is another biblical reference, as is the stranger's bloodied palms, symbolizing the wounds from Christ's crucifixion. When the brother-in-law stabs the stranger after the old man's initial attack, this mirrors the Roman soldiers stabbing Jesus' side with a spear after his death. The stranger's last words, "He's thirsty," also echo the words of Christ before his death on the cross. All these signs lead Dawn to believe the man they've just killed was Jesus. As the well-known Christian hymn plays, it underscores the scene where the family cooperates to clean up the crime scene and wrap the body in a British flag. Once the task is completed, they sit together, convincing themselves that the dead man was merely an illegal immigrant, not the second coming of Christ. The story concludes with the family singing Auld Lang Syne, a song about the passing of time and friendship, as the final twist unfolds. Jesus rises again, and Dawn falls into his arms, reaffirming her belief. This is Daniel CC Movie Channel. Stay safe and enjoy your day.